Okay, so welcome to this week's episode of the Path Less Chosen, the podcast showing the careers they don't teach you about in school. My name's Sol.
And I'm Jamie.
And this week's episode is Tom. Tom is a fellow Durham graduate now working in the sports industry. Seriously cool chat, mate, but I'll let Jamie exactly tell us what you can expect from today's episode.
Yeah, going to be a brilliant episode. So he's working in media rights in sport, which is a fascinating sector. So the three biggest things I'm looking forward to is firstly, he's going to explain to us how big sponsorship deals work. Secondly, he's going to explain the art of networking within the sports industry. And thirdly, he's going to talk about how to get people on the phone and talking to you.
Dream meet. Yes, very good, very good. And looking forward to getting into the episode. Without further ado, let's do it.
Anders, it's good to have you on. I think what we were going to do to begin with actually was as a bit of context for the audience. And I was actually trying to find this message from you the other day. But I remember you reaching out to me when you must have been second year or first year, whenever it was, asking to meet up for a coffee and discuss a little bit more about the sports world. So I think the first question was, how have we got from that conversation that we had over a coffee in Durham a couple of years back to where you are now working on the sponsorship rights in the Champions League?
Well, you're not wrong, mate. So this was something which I also went back to try and find last week, because I think for me it was quite significant as sort of what I see as the start of my journey. And at the time it kind of came about from having this interest in sport, playing sport my whole life and seeing that as something which I really enjoyed and invested a lot of my time into, and then kind of thinking about what that could look like going forward as something that I might be interested in pursuing a career in. And I think at the time, without really knowing much about what a job in sport could be or a future in sport could be, I kind of reached out to someone who I knew was kind of working in this space and to get some advice, which I'd say has served me pretty well to this point. But I think, I kind of reached out because I saw that you were doing work at the time in football agency, that sort of thing, and looked like you were having a pretty good time with it. So, I reached out. We went, I think I came round to yours that evening, actually. It all happened quite quickly. Yeah. And, I remember kind of sitting down in your room and just trying to get as much insight from you as I could, as someone who was kind of doing some work in that space. And I remember you gave me some very good pointers of people in the industry who were doing good things and doing very good work for kind of educating people about what careers in sport could be. Kind of followed up on that, looking at different resources that were out there, learning a bit more about different opportunities. And then that kind of led to me doing my own research now with a couple of pointers of where to go, really. Because I think it's something which we've both talked about in length about the sports industry, is how kind of closed off it seems from the outside and how almost mystical it can seem without much direction as to what actually goes on. So I think for me that was kind of a really good starting point, almost to have a couple of ideas of what I wanted to learn more about. Went off and kind of did my own research, and we kind of went from there with following my interest in the industry and trying to build my knowledge and develop some experience. And I remember that led to kind of my first bit of work experience over the summer, which for me kind of I see as a bit of a trigger for things leading on from there and building on. But it definitely all started from, that conversation that we had back in Durham. Just kind of hearing your thoughts on what you learned to that point.
Amazing. And as like an external person within this, like obviously you guys spoke to each other, I'm fascinated to get into that topic of, okay, so a lot of people know that Jamie obviously is doing very well in sport, and a lot of people know that, know people who are doing well in various fields. But why did you actually decide to reach out, and I guess what were the steps in doing that?
I think one of the things which made it very easy was we were good mates, and when there's very little barrier to dropping someone a message and going for a coffee or whatever, it's very easy to do. I think if I didn't have someone who was sort of a close mate of mine at the time that I could quite easily just go and have a chat with, then it might have been more difficult, and that conversation may not have happened when it did. But I remember at the time it was when I was looking at doing applications for placement years. So it was kind of the winter of second year, I think. And at the time I was sending off applications to do a year out before my final year at uni. And that kind of probably got me a bit more proactive about thinking what I wanted to do, because it meant that for that year, if I was doing something in sport, something I was interested in, then I think I was going to enjoy it a lot more. So then I kind of had a bit more of a motivation to seek out and put a bit more time into thinking about what I wanted to do post-uni. I think that's how I was then thinking, who do I know that's doing things in sport that I could kind of lean on and get a bit of guidance for what my placement year applications could look like, where I should be looking. And then it was quite easy to reach out to Jamie at the time.
Love it. I think it's an important point to raise there, though. In sport, it's closed off, and a lot of people kind of think, how do I get into it? How can I speak to some people? Which is great as an initial thought, but I think a lot less than actually ever follow through with anything. And obviously you did, and I think I remember from the conversation that you were kind of so open-minded to opportunities within sport and looking as to where to go. And I think that's obviously now how you've ended up putting yourself into a really good position and kind of starting out that career in sport. But one thing I think will be interesting to hear about as well is you did then end up, you're talking about your applications there, you did then end up going out to Germany and spent a year working with Allianz, right? And so tell us how that came about and then the kind of experience you garnered from that to lead you to what you're doing now.
So again, a very close link to how we kind of started things off, where one of the people who you kind of put me in contact with at the time, Jessie, I was writing or sort of supporting her on producing a couple of articles. And she was a sports lawyer based in Spain at the time. And through kind of building a relationship with her, we connected on LinkedIn, all that good stuff. And then she'd reposted a job listing for this internship position at Allianz in Munich. And working in their sports team, so their team who managed their partnership with the Olympics and the Paralympics at the time, because they were the insurance partner of the games. And I was kind of searching on LinkedIn one day and saw her repost this job listing, and kind of on a bit of a whim thinking what's the worst that could happen, sent off an application, and things went very well with it. But it all kind of stemmed back from that connection that I'd made from that conversation we'd had. Then something came up because in her network a position was being advertised, and I kind of sent off that application. I think it happened within the space of a couple of weeks from me sending off my initial application to things kind of being confirmed. So those were kind of the steps that took place for me to sort of get that on my radar and send off the application in the first place.
Amazing. And I want to go into detail on what you actually did in that year and what you learned. But I think you made a comment there that I wanted to highlight to anyone listening, because you talked about the fact that you were doing articles for Jessie. And I think something that quite quickly became apparent when you were going down this journey is your name started popping up in places and associated with great people because of this stuff. And I think that's a really important learning and takeaway for anyone listening that maybe is thinking of going down the sports industry. Explain exactly what you were doing, why you were writing these articles. I think you were doing them for free, right, at the time, which is, I think, definitely an important topic to cover. And I spoke about it recently with Sol for going into sport. But yeah, what were you doing with these articles? Why did you see value in doing that? And how do you think that benefited you then?
So at the time, it started off with supporting, producing these articles that would analyse different areas of sports law. And for me, I think one of the big motivations was developing my own knowledge base and learning more. Because if you're looking to put out a piece on a topic, you want it to be a very high quality. And to that end, you do research and invest a lot of your own time into becoming knowledgeable on a topic so that you can write about it and it be half decent. So I think one topic was definitely to kind of build my own knowledge. Secondly was being able to offer something and add value to someone who you're building a relationship with, and a meaningful relationship. I think it's one of the big lessons which I've learned, and Jamie, I'm sure you can attest to this from the work that we've done with Daniel. It's something that he has as a very strong message, is how can you add value to someone? Because if you're wanting to interact with people who are significant figures in the industry, who are very busy and have lots of things that are on their plate, how can you kind of support them? And I think it's important to think about how you add value and can provide a useful service almost. So to that end, it was the time that I had to put effort into these articles to be able to support and like you said, kind of get your name out there on a piece of work that's good, that is going to build your reputation and kind of give you different opportunities to expand your network and sort of continue that outreach program almost of building your own brand. And for me, that started off with an article that I did with Jessie, and then expanded into sort of my own articles that I continued to produce with other young professionals, and also some work that I was doing with Daniel at the time. And this all came from, like we said, wanting to build those meaningful relationships, add value in those kind of interactions. Yeah, so I think that's kind of how it came about.
Yeah, absolutely. Such an important message. I think, obviously, I can't really assess it in other industries, so I've not been a part of it, but the whole meaningful connections things and building relationships and offering value to them is just so incredibly important in the sports world. Definitely something that I've picked up on. So then to go back into what you were doing in Munich, that was when you took a year off from university. What were you actually doing then, and what did you learn that's put you in a position to be able to do what you're doing now?
So during my placement year, I spent 10 months out in Munich, based at the Allianz headquarters there. And like I said, I was working in a team of about 20 who were managing our global partnership with the Olympics and the Paralympics. So Allianz had signed this deal to be the insurance partner of the Games. And at the time, we were in the lead up to Paris. So what's just been a very exciting summer. This was kind of 2 years out at the time. And I think one of the things that you come to realise when working on big partnerships and big deals is how much lead up time there is before what you might see as the main event almost. And in this case, I think Paris was a very clear example of that. But more specifically within our team, I was working across our athletes programme and then also our program management, project management side of things. And on our athletes program, I was one of 3 people in the team at the time who were responsible with contracting and then activating our athletes up to the Games. And I think with the athlete side of things being a real interest of mine, especially at the time, it was great to sort of get that prolonged exposure in sport and working so directly on something which I was very interested in. And for that, I think I was very lucky and feel very grateful that I had that opportunity at the time. So for us, it was interacting with our athletes, looking at how the relationships that we're building with them can be beneficial on both sides, and what are the best ways for us to interact with these athletes to promote what we're doing with the Games and then also provide meaningful support for them. Because I think that one of the things that we understood as part of our strategy was you're not a sexy brand like Coke or Samsung who can give them products. But instead, it was kind of us, how can we provide a service to the athletes that can support them? And a lot of our work at the time was looking at how we prepare them better for life post-sport. We all know how drastic that change can be for athletes, especially if a career can be cut very short. Athletes often forego education at a younger age so that they can commit to their sport. And we were looking at, especially with the Olympics, where sort of your big event is every 4 years, how we kind of support athletes in that transition away from professional sport, which I thought was really interesting and something which it was great for me to kind of get involved in at the time. And then the second aspect of the work I was doing was on our program management work. So it was kind of how we tracked our progress as a team from where we were at the time up until the Games, to make sure that everything was moving in the right direction. And I think although at the time it was slightly more tedious work, and it wasn't sort of the flashy stuff which you see going on in the sports industry so much, it was very important for me at that early stage to learn processes and structures of how a successful team operates. And I think I left about a year before the Games, year and a half before the Games actually happened, but it's been really exciting and really cool to see how the team has continued to grow and was able to deliver a really successful campaign over the Games. Yeah, still have some very fond memories of my time at Allianz in Munich.
Fascinating. And what was it like being there as someone who's just interested in sport and someone who's in that world? Because from my perspective, like, that's what I see as being really cool, fascinating part, is you're a sports fan who's in and amongst the sport aspect. Was that cool?
Amazing. Completely lives up to the hype. One of the things that I kind of see a big distinction between is having an interest in sport and being passionate about sport, but then passionate about working in sport. So I think the two are very different. And I think if you're looking to have a sustained career in the industry, I think that's the very important distinction to make. So I think for me, as someone who has always played lots of sports and kind of always has it on the TV, it's amazing to be around those worlds and to be in conversations with athletes, teams and players that we see on the TV. But then I think equally and possibly more so, actually being able to work quite directly on everything else that goes on behind the scenes, almost I find as exciting. So to see how, like I said, these big partnerships go on and kind of the cogs which really drive the industry forwards, I think is kind of another side that I get a lot of satisfaction and excitement from.
Yeah, I can imagine. And also for people listening that maybe like they'll see the activations, right? They'll always see like Allianz plastered here, wherever, Heineken coming up on the adverts for the Champions League, whatever it might be. They'll always see them, but they don't really understand or appreciate what goes in behind that. So maybe you can explain that a little bit. How do these work? How do they decide what assets, what activation, what rights, what does that even mean? Explain a little bit more about how these big sponsorship agreements work.
Yeah, I'm not sure how good a job I'm going to do here, but I'll give it my best. Yeah. So, I mean, my work at the moment is slightly aside from sponsorship. But on the sponsorship side, I mean, you see the big partnerships that go on with brand association with clubs and the different opportunities that come there, be that on shirt sponsorship, sponsoring a product or a service that you're providing to a club or a tournament, etc. I mean, for me at the moment, I'm working on the media side of things. Specifically there, currently work at a company called Team, and we manage a full service sports agency for UEFA across their men's club competitions. And within that, I work on our media team, and that looks at the relationships that we have with broadcasters. So in each territory, the rights which are offered, so the media rights, kind of the right to broadcast the football is bid for and then is sold and packaged up to partners in each territory. And the sort of work that I do at the moment looks at how broadcasters can maximise the commercial value that they have from those rights. And more specifically, that looks at, in a certain broadcast that you're showing on Sky, TNT, etc., where can they show certain ads and the types of product promotion they do. And I think this is one of the sides which I've really had kind of my eyes open to the past couple of months, is we might be watching a broadcast of a Champions League game and they cut to a studio segment and someone's giving analysis, but there are very specific rules around when you can have a 7-Up can in the corner, when you can sort of have those crawlers that we see on the TV with certain sponsors showing match analytics or match graphics. And again, there's so many tight regulations around what can and can't be done in certain countries with different brands, which is something I think I certainly wasn't aware of beforehand. But that's kind of a bit of an insight into some of the things I pick up there. And you see it now when you're watching sport. You watch sport differently. And Jamie, I'm sure you have experienced this as well, where I now can't sort of not notice the different sponsorships that are coming up and the different ways that sport is now broadcast across different properties.
Definitely I have noticed it. Like it's one of those things that you can't end up like detaching it, because you just pick up on certain things. Like even now, like watching the darts around Christmas, I'm trying to just enjoy the darts, but like I'm noticing like the positioning of like the sleeve sponsors and stuff like that, like on some of the darts players. And it is obviously something that a lot of thought and process goes into, that I think for people just watching on TV will see the end product, but they don't really understand that like there's actually quite extenuous like negotiations and agreements that have to get written up and put into it. And I think when you kind of put it like that, and when you start thinking about it, it becomes quite complicated. But the way you're talking about it there, you're clearly very knowledgeable now. And you touched upon it earlier about like building up your knowledge base and like improving yourself and how you understand things. How important is that for anyone else looking to go into like the sports industry, to get like a prior understanding, do their own research, do their own knowledge? But actually sometimes I found it quite difficult because there's not loads and loads just written up about it, versus learning on the job like what you're doing now. Obviously you're getting experience in different areas with Team at the moment. How are you like picking up and how are you learning that, and how would you advise someone if they want to go and understand it using the internet or something? How important is that they go and build that knowledge base beforehand as well?
I think it's can't be understated, and one of the reasons I say that is because now, even as someone who, although I'm very early on in my career, I'm working in the industry, there's still so much which on the daily that I'm learning. And I think there is that difficulty that there's not a book you can go and read to learn about sports business. But I think the attitude that you've got to have, and it has to be sort of an attitude that you embody, is that any experience, any piece of knowledge which you can pick up is going to serve you well going forwards, even if you don't know at the time how it kind of fits into your wider understanding. So I remember for me early on, a lot of it was reaching out to people, having conversations and just asking people in sport about the work they did. And I know it's something which you as well, Jamie, were very, very proactive on. It's building those relationships with people on LinkedIn, and kind of as cliche almost as it sounds, if you can have a 10, 20-minute call with someone who works in the industry and just have them chat non-stop about the work they do, it feeds into your sort of wider knowledge of understanding how things work together. And it can be very difficult because at the start you don't know anything, and you're continually learning, and there's so much that you don't know. But it's kind of just having different aspects of knowledge that you can piece together and kind of keep yourself going almost. I think that now, with being in the industry, there are different sources that I go to for news that I keep on top of. So, I mean, Sport Business, Sports Pro, and kind of the FT, the work they do in sport, I think is really good for me to keep tabs on what's going on, and you get the news stories around sport, media, sponsorship, all that good stuff, that you can kind of piece things together. But I think more of it is about having the attitude of just trying to absorb as much as you can. And I think I maybe sort of annoying people in the offices at times with how much I'm just chewing their ear off about the work they do and just trying to know more about the experiences they've had. But I think you've kind of got to be proactive and putting yourself out there and kind of making yourself feel vulnerable at times, that you might ask a stupid question, but you've just got to kind of have this real hunger to learn as much as you can, I guess. And I think for me, as good as it is to read books around the industry, which are great at kind of getting you up to speed, again, it is so important to have those conversations with people that are working in the industry.
Is that something you feel like you've got from being in an office, like being around those people, as opposed to the kind of LinkedIn conversations, or would you say a bit of both is very healthy?
I'd say a bit of both. Early on, for me, it was when I was at university, you don't have people that you're around all the time who you can have these conversations with, right? So you need to be using what is a great tool in the access that we have over the internet and digital connection and platform like LinkedIn to have access to those types of conversations. But I'd say the flip side is now being in the office with people. I think it's so amazing that you can just go and grab a coffee with someone that's been working in sport for 20 years and kind of pick their brains on things. So I think there's definitely two different kind of aspects to it. And for me, I think that being in person, having those conversations is more rewarding, and it's easier to build those relationships. But that's not to say that sort of there isn't a lot of value in those digital connections and what you can do online. I mean, I'm a big advocate of now, with having access to going into the office, being in there as much as I can, just because it's where I can learn so much from just seeing how people kind of go about their business. But then, yeah, those connections that you can build over platforms like LinkedIn and the internet are sort of quite important.
Yeah, definitely. I think one thing that I've noticed, and I kind of see it as like there's like two layers to learning to like get into the sports industry. There's of course learning like the actual sports industry and how to like work within it and what's involved. But actually the layer before that is learning how to build relationships in the sports industry, like to even get to the stage of having those opportunities. And I think that's obviously something that you've done really well. I think a lot of the time, like if anyone has a phone call and someone just ring the phone and they say, look, how do you get into the sports industry? What do you do now? They aren't really meaningful questions where there's not really much like thought that's gone into it. But obviously when you came around, we had that first initial conversation, it was definitely not about that. You know, there was a bit of thought and purpose behind it. And I think that's a whole like kind of skill in itself that obviously you've got now. So what would your advice be to people that are looking to have conversations with people in the sports industry, which can be difficult to get hold of, difficult to actually get them onto a call? But once you get them onto a call, how are you approaching that conversation to actually make it beneficial for both parties rather than then leaving it thinking, well, that was a waste of my time?
I think you're spot on, and there's real difficulty in getting people on the phone. But when you're there, you want to make the opportunity count, right? So I think that preparation is so important, and I think it's something which I've kind of had drilled into me from sort of playing sport and the way that sort of my environment and people around me, I guess, go about our business. Preparation in these sort of experiences can't be understated. I think you need to know who you're talking to. Like you said, there's no point finally getting someone on the phone who is extremely knowledgeable and has so much that they can kind of get across, and then just give them a really boring question that's just not gonna get them engaged. So I think you need to kind of have an understanding of their world and kind of what they're into, what their expertise is in, and be able to ask engaging questions. And I think one of the most rewarding signs of this, I guess, is if someone says they have 20 minutes and you get on a call and you have back and forth conversation that is quite engaging, and then the call ends up going on for 40 minutes or an hour or something. I think that's a good marker that kind of you've been able to add value in those situations. Because if someone's giving you their time and is happy to spare 10, 15 minutes, that's something they don't have to do. There's certainly no obligation on their side. So I think it's kind of your responsibility to do some work beforehand to make sure that when you're given those opportunities, you can add value and provide a meaningful conversation.
And how did you go out about, because I'm sure a lot of people listening right now have a desire to go out and network with those people. How did you go and find them?
Great question. That's a really good question. I think it all starts with kind of that first step. I think although it can be quite daunting almost to see how much people are doing and the incredible work that sort of people our age are achieving in the industry, you've got to start with that first step. And I think in terms of building relationships, it's reaching out to, let's say, 5 people on LinkedIn, if we're going to say that's the way that you're doing it, and just kind of building your network from there and not seeing it as this massive task that you have to go out and overnight have 100 people that you have really meaningful relationships with that you're contacting on the daily. Because I think it starts small, but then there's definitely a compound effect of you build 5 meaningful relationships with people around you who are working in sport, and then they know someone else who they want to make a connection to you with, and then you can have a conversation there. So I think it can be as simple as finding someone who putting a search on LinkedIn and finding someone who works in the industry that went to your uni, and it means that you have something that you can kind of bond over, and maybe they give you 10 minutes of their time. But I think you just have to start very small with this, because I think that then one of the kind of return effects that you see is now I would say that I've for a couple of years been proactively building this network of mine and building relationships, and then you see 2 random people that you've met in different environments in the industry also know each other or have a shared connection. And I think that's a really cool moment when you kind of see how things piece together, and I think that all starts with being proactive in building a couple of relationships and just going from there and seeing it as very manageable steps.
Love it. Yeah, I think such an important point you raised there was like actually just got to be patient about it. It's not like a overnight thing. But yeah, definitely now I mean, you're only just getting started really, right, in the grand scheme of things, but definitely the fact that you're already noticing the compound effect and people linking in is so important, and that's why if you can just stick at it rather than a few phone calls at the start and then giving up on it, if you stick at it for a few years, it leads you to this now, right? And so as I mentioned, you are just really getting started. This is like on your first year out of university going into it. So give us now a bit of an understanding where are you wanting to go? What would kind of like the dream be within the sports world? Where do you want that path to take you?
I think without kind of getting ahead of ourselves here, one of the things which I love at the moment, which is a goal which I identified a couple of years ago when I was kind of starting off, is to be part of and an active participant to the biggest deals that are going on in the industry. And I think for me now to have an opportunity where dealing with the negotiation and sale of media broadcast rights across, in this instance, the Champions League is pretty spot on for the route that I'm wanting to take. And I think if I look at the people who I work with and are in more senior positions in the teams that I'm operating, I can kind of have an eye on that and think that that's a target that I want to work towards and could see myself really evolving into that kind of position. I think one of the great things about the sports industry is that it's rapidly evolving, and no one knows what the industry is going to look like in 5-10 years. But I think it's a case of kind of positioning myself and building expertise so that in 5-10 years time I'm someone who can be at the forefront of as a leader in the industry and be shaping the direction that it goes in and hoping to kind of continue the positive work that we're doing.
Amazing. So cool. Well, excited to see that play out over the next few years for sure. It sounds like you've got all the building blocks to get there, mate. So very exciting. In terms of the last question that we ask our guests, would love to ask you, and that is if you could take you back to a time, maybe it's when you were networking in university with Jamie. What is one thing you do the same? What is one thing you do differently? And what is one thing you tell yourself to motivate yourself?
So one thing I do the same, I think it's at every point along the journey, making sure that you're really, really present in where you are and seeing the good things that are happening and taking real satisfaction in that. Because I think that I can look back now over the 2 years and at every stage, even when it's been extremely tough periods of being in the depth of uni work or being nervous about going into different opportunities or making the decision to go and live abroad for a year by myself, not really knowing what's going to happen there. I think at every moment I was very conscious of the good things that are happening and knowing that any tough situation isn't going to last for forever, at least. So I think I'd say being very grateful in those moments to appreciate what you have. Do differently, I think it's a case of not thinking too far ahead and not worrying about things which are happening in the future that don't actually happen in the end. I think that, and looking back especially to my time playing sport, I think this was something which I didn't do very well at the time. It was getting worked up about things that are happening in the future to the point where it would affect my mindset and how I was acting at the time. I think cricket's a very good example of this, where you get worked up about a game that's happening next week, and by the time you get there, you've played every scenario in your head about 100 times and you just feel absolutely spent before you actually get out on the pitch. So I think it's a case of, as difficult as it sounds, just dealing with what you're facing in the present and not getting too worked up about things in the future. I think it is one thing which I'm very conscious about now and trying to kind of action that in the way I'm going about things. I think for me, I've always been someone who's very positive and has always dreamed big, as cliche as that sounds. But I would say it's motivating myself by saying that there aren't any limits to kind of what you can achieve. I think looking back at the message that I'd sent to Jamie was a bit of a realization for me at the time. But when I was looking back last week, because that was 2 years ago now, and to kind of see the kind of things I'm doing now compared to where I was back then, I think is real motivation for me. And if I told Tom back in second year in your flat back in Durham whether he thinks he'd be sort of in this position now in 2 years, I don't think that would be the case. So I think it's just kind of not putting any limit on the goals that you go after.
Yeah. No, amazing, mate. I'm so glad you said that, because I think for me, when I was about to round off now, I was going to say, like, one thing I definitely remember telling you that I think I say to a lot of people as well, and kind of gets said back to me also, is when we're kind of starting out and, you know, in early 20s, etc., for anyone going into the sports industry, the reason why I always think it's great to like jump on a call and actually see if you can help each other is because hopefully in the next 10, 20 years, you're going to be the guys that are doing the big things in sport. And if you made a connection with them in the early 20s, then it's always going to pay off in the long run. And I think the fact now that 2 years later, you're doing the stuff you're doing, it's amazing. Like, and just listening to the kind of insights you've given us today, how like you think about it and the attitude, I've got every confidence that you are going to be one of the top guys in sport in the next 10 years. It would be great if I could play a tiny small part of that by speaking to you in my room in a horrible little place in Durham. And if it leads to us having a relationship for the next 10 years and working together in sport for however long, then, you know, it's so worth making those connections. Really appreciate you jumping on. Thanks for sharing everything with us. Really fascinating to hear, and really enjoyed it.
Well, thanks very much for having me, guys. Really good conversation, and love the work you're doing.
Okay, unreal chat. Tom, very nice guy, obviously doing really cool things in the world of sport. In terms of takeaways, mate, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, definitely. I think the first one that I think resonated in quite a few of the answers he gave was just pure focus on building like his own knowledge base and actually just learning stuff. He spoke about it in a few ways. To begin with, he was saying like the value in just investing the time to become knowledgeable yourself. And even that means that like you offer to do stuff for free for certain people. At the end of the day, that's better than doing it quietly in your bedroom without kind of anything being shown in public. If you can take the opportunity to educate yourself, learn as much as you possibly can, and then apply that further down the line. But he's definitely not stopping learning anytime soon. He's continuing to learn all the time. And now that he's in a position where he's surrounded by people in an office that are doing all of this stuff and they have the experience and knowledge already, having X amount of years in the industry, he's still got an attitude, and he described it like it is an attitude to have, where you sit around these people, chewing their ear off, whatever it might be, to absorb as much as he possibly can to learn it. And I think that was a really good takeaway.
The attitude on the guy is very impressive. I subscribe to that wholeheartedly. From my point, mate, I mean, look, we say this on quite a lot of episodes, but I think even more striking that you were the person that he reached out to for help. And I think this is one thing that a lot of people don't do, is when they're trying to break into any industry, let alone an industry that is like the sports industry and quite closed off. If you're not someone who's willing to go and ask for help and go and speak to the people who are doing it best, then you're really going to struggle. And it was very clear that he worked out that person was you, had a chat with you, and you clearly set him on the right directions. Good job, mate. Amazing that Tom realised that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I think it's a really good takeaway, and kind of links into my third point, which is on a bit more on like the actual art of networking. I think something that he talks about, and I think that I know from experience of chatting to him, he does really well, is actually taking on a responsibility he said, it is your responsibility to make sure that you're preparing and providing a meaningful conversation for the person that you're meeting. Don't just go and speak to them for the sake of it, but when you turn up, because if you have a genuine appreciation that the more networking you're going to be doing, there's a compound effect around it. It's going to open more and more doors to you, and you're going to open up avenues into new people. The only way you can go about doing that is actually adding value in the conversation you're currently having, because no one's going to introduce you to a friend that might be able to help you unless you've turned up at that conversation and kind of impressed them, right? It's all about first impressions and building those relationships. And something that he talked about was it's my responsibility to show up in that room, making sure I've done my preparation and making sure that conversation is not a total waste of their time. They're giving up their time for me. I've got to make sure I've showed and made an effort to make sure it's meaningful.
100%, could not agree more on that. So in terms of first takeaway, about investing in your knowledge base and absorbing from people, and then the second point is with that understanding of who's doing well in the space, going and finding them and doing just that. And then when you're actually doing that, preparing yourself and making sure that you're well versed on what they do so that you can make it such a meaningful connection. So yeah, mate, very good episode. Awesome to get more insight into the sports world. Loved chatting to Tom, and another great guest. Thanks very much for listening at all, and we'll catch you next time.